Welcome to the special conversation with Speaker of the House, Speaker Johnson. Speaker Johnson, thank you for taking time to come on this program. I've enjoyed speaking to you over the last couple of weeks. You have a difficult task in front of you, and thank you for taking the time.
Hey, Charlie, great to hear your voice, my friend. Thanks for the dialogue we've had, and thanks for saying that it's difficult and not impossible, because everybody else is impossible.
That's right. With God, all things are possible. So, Speaker Johnson, let's just start with the task in front of you. And you know that I've been very frustrated with certain things, as our audience is as well, because it just feels as if the Democrats, they get almost everything they ask for. But let's talk about the reality in front of you and in front of the House of Representatives. People have said this is the slimmest House majority in American history. Is that true? And since you become Speaker, it's only seemed to get smaller. Walk us through that, please.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, this is the reality that we have right now, the smallest majority in U.S. history. It's almost literally true. We have a one-vote margin right now, Charlie, and surprisingly, that's not the smallest ever. In 1917, the 65th Congress, by the way, before women had the right to vote during World War I, the Democrats had control, but by the numbers, they had a 0.43% majority. Ours is 1.16%, if you do the math. So we can only lose one vote. And that makes the passage of legislation that we want and that you and I would draft, that we prefer, a very, very difficult task. And, among the historic norms and the lines that have been breached in this Congress is the new practice of voting against our own party's procedural rules on the House floor. And what does that mean? Well, prior to this Congress, that would have been inconceivable, but in the past 12 months, at one point or another, for a wide variety of reasons, by the way, a total of about 47 House Republicans now have voted at least once to defeat our own floor rules, and even more threatened to do so. What does that mean? Well, it means we can't any longer bring our preferred legislation to the floor to pass it with a simple majority. So when you're looking at must-pass legislation, for example, for funding the government, and instead of bringing the bills that we would prefer to the floor, we have to do it now on what's called a suspension vote, which, as you know, means it's got to pass by 2/3 of the House. And our numbers are so small, that requires us to bring less partisan provisions in order to get at least some Democrat votes, or the legislation doesn't pass. So, everybody in Washington knows that dilemma. And of course, the Democrats know it well, and Chuck Schumer knows it best. And so it puts him in a better negotiating position at the end. And that's the challenge we face right now.
It is a challenge. So I want to talk about the kind of ever evaporating House majority. First, Santos, you voted against expelling Santos. Was there anything that you could have done to prevent that motion from coming to the floor? Or was that privilege in a sense where it had to go open to a vote? And then additionally, Ken Buck disappearing, Gallagher disappearing. It doesn't feel as if we have control even of our members to stay unified during this highly consequential time.
Yeah, the big challenge right now is keeping the team together, right? And let me say this, and I'll address each of those cases, but we have to keep our eyes on the prize. We have the smallest majority in history, but that is going to change in November. I am absolutely bullish on this election cycle. We're going to grow the House majority. I believe the Republicans are going to win the Senate and the White House as well. I think President Trump is going to have a second term, and he and I have been talking a lot about that. We got to be ready to govern, and we're going to turn this mess around 180 degrees. But we've got to get through this difficult valley to get to that other side. And it doesn't help when people leave early, obviously. I voted against the Santos expel motion. It was privileged. So some of the guys from New York brought that. It was very important to them, neighboring districts and all of that. I tried to talk them out of it. It was done anyway. And so that special election, as you know, yielded a Democrat. We might have foreseen that. And I tried to stop it, but we were outvoted. A privileged motion is allowed to go to the floor, even over the objection of everyone else. So that's what happened there. Ken Buck, I guess has personal reasons for leaving early. I've considered Ken a friend all these years. We served in the House together for 7 years. He's leaving early. I tried to talk him out of it. He didn't give me a lot of notice. He called me about 20 minutes before he made it public. So there was not a lot of time for dialogue on that. Gallagher is a colleague and a friend, a classmate of mine. We served together. He's done great work in Congress. The Select Commission on China, Select Committee on China, for example. I've encouraged him to carefully consider all his options to limit the time his seat remains vacant. And including the idea of serving his full term out in some limited capacity. But I'll leave it to him to explain all his reasons why he needs to depart before the end of the year. But there is a caveat to that one that maybe people aren't aware of. But Wisconsin election laws is a little bit different, and there's a big risk under that state's law that if Gallagher leaves before April 9th or after May 14th, there's a risk the Democrat governor there could push the special election back to fill the seat to a date that's even later than the November election. And that would leave us with a vacancy at the start of the new Congress. So there's a lot of calculation that's going into that. But the point is, Charlie, my job is to keep this team together, to keep everybody rowing in the same direction so we can deliver and grow the majority, because our mission is to save the country. Without a Republican majority, we have no hope of doing that.
And I believe that is the mission. And so let's talk about the impeachment of Mayorkas. You were able to successfully do that, which I think you deserve credit for. You got that across the finish line. And again, Gallagher's not my favorite guy. He voted against it, and then you had to bring in somebody else who was traveling, and you got it done. Talk about that success. I know you're on the southern border right now. And additionally then, Mr. Speaker, if you were able to get a historic impeachment of Mayorkas done with a slim majority, why can't we get other consequential victories done? What made this one different? And is there a blueprint that we can maybe replicate for other major issues in front of us?
Yeah, great questions, Charlie. And look, let's remember, we have had a very productive House Republican. Passed a lot of key legislation. I mean, including, you typically number your legislation in terms of priority. HR 1 was the energy bill to reduce energy costs and get us back to energy dominance. We passed it through the House. It's been sitting on Chuck Schumer's desk ever since. The HR 2 was our security. Everybody knows all of the provisions of that now would have solved this catastrophe. But of course, Chuck Schumer, who runs the Senate, lets it sit on the desk. That one's been collecting dust for about 11 months. But Mayorkas clearly deserves to be impeached on that subject. I mean, for violating the public trust. And I mean, he willfully refuses to comply with federal immigration laws. He's lied to Congress repeatedly. He's lied to me face to face under oath multiple times in the Judiciary Committee where I used to serve. And the House duly passed articles of impeachment. I mean, it's the first cabinet secretary ever to have gone through that process, but desperate times call for desperate measures. And this guy is a singular case. I mean, he helped engineer the open border catastrophe and all of its terrible consequences. I sent a letter today to Chuck Schumer to let him know we will deliver those articles of impeachment from the House to the Senate as soon as they return to session on April 10th. And I informed Chuck Schumer that he has got to fulfill his constitutional responsibility. He has to hold an impeachment trial on the merits, and he needs to do it expeditiously. We'll see how that comes out, but we have to do our duty in the House. It's a constitutional responsibility, and we have. And you mentioned I'm on the border. I'm in Dallas right now. I just landed. I was in Austin a few hours ago. Met with Governor Abbott at the governor's mansion there. We talked about this unmitigated disaster and what it's meant to Texas and the whole country. And hats off to him for standing so strong. I reiterated once again, we're with him in the fight. We'll do everything we possibly can as House Republicans.
So I want to talk about the $1.2 trillion spending bill, which has been met with a lot of criticism, as you know, Mr. Speaker. Marjorie Taylor Greene is going out and threatening motion to vacate. She has criticized you by saying that regular order was not followed, the amendment process, and this was done very, very quickly and kind of rushed through. I don't like the bill at all. I think it was, quite honestly, awful. Am I wrong? Walk me through it, Mr. Speaker. And was regular order followed in kind of response to what Marjorie Taylor Greene's been saying?
Yeah, great questions. Okay, look, the bill is not the bill that Mike Johnson and Charlie Kirk and Marjorie would have drafted, right? If we had the majority in the House and Senate, we're having a totally different conversation right now. It's government, and remember, we only have one vote margin in the House. So there are some good things. Let me tell you a few good things about it, and then we'll tell you all the terrible things, right? So remember, 72% of this appropriations package was defense spending. Okay, we increased defense spending, which most of us understand why. We're in a dangerous time. The world's on fire because Joe Biden is projecting weakness on the world stage, and all of our adversaries are acting provocatively. We've got hot wars now, and some that are heating up elsewhere. We kept the non-defense discretionary spending completely flatlined. in divided government. We included the largest pay raise for our troops in decades, and we cut a lot of things that needed to be cut, like $50 million in military DEI programs. So we eliminated funding for UNRWA. We rescinded $20 billion of Biden's IRS expansion. We pulled back $6 billion in unused COVID funds. I mean, there were some good things on the border regarding that issue. This bill increased the baseline for DHS enforcement when Trump takes over in January. I mean, if we're going to actually arrest and detain these people and deport them, you got to have a place to put them. So we squeezed into this bill the highest number of ICE detention beds and Border Patrol agents in history. Wow, we cut 20% from the NGOs, which are all the groups that are sending them all around the country. There's a lot of good things. We maintained all the Hyde Amendment protections, pro-life protection. Not a red cent can be used of taxpayer funds to fund an abortion. We allowed for only American flags and other official flags to fly over U.S. diplomatic facilities, no more rainbows and everything else. So look, there's some good things in it, but there's some bad things too. The earmarks are the things that have gotten all the attention. And there's a number of them in here that none of us wanted, and we fought hard to keep out. And as I told you offline, I was literally fighting with Chuck Schumer up until 11:58 p.m. on that last Wednesday, because that was the deadline to file the legislation to give everybody not the full 72 hours that we always try to abide by, but at least time to go through the 1,000 pages with their staff, section by section, and be able to digest what the legislation was. You asked about the process, critically important thing. Look, if we could have pushed it beyond the deadline, we would have even maybe shut the government down for a day or two. But the problem is, because you're coming up on Easter break, I mean, this is the truth of the matter. We were going to have a jailbreak by Saturday morning. You'd have a bunch of members that would jump on planes and go to their previously scheduled engagements.
That's a perfect, sorry to interrupt, but that's a perfect segue. And Mr. Speaker, I understand this might be kind of heretical to DC belief, but why not just say we're going to shut it down? I understand it's an election year. I know you got the slimmest majority, but if we are not ever able to make good on the one threat that we have, which is a government shutdown, which is just partial, is there anything that would potentially reach that level of a shutdown? And since we have the slimmest majority and we're losing members to cable news sponsorships and Palantir, what do we have to lose? What is the argument not to shut it down, considering the crisis on the border that I know that you want to address?
Yeah, it's such an important question, Charlie. Every single one of us want to have the fight about the border. It's like a 93% issue, by the way, with the public now. But even if it wasn't politically popular, morally, constitutionally, we would be obligated to fight on it. But here's the thing about the shutdown. In this scenario right now, given the dynamics and the realities that we talked about a moment ago, if we had shut the government down, let's say on Friday, the Biden administration would have made it extremely painful on the American people immediately. The media would have piled on, of course, and blamed Republicans for missed paychecks to troops and missed flights when they stopped paying TSA agents and, unpatrolled border sectors. They would have flipped the script and started to blame the border on Republicans for not arming and equipping the people who are there trying to do what they do. All the national polling confirms that a shutdown would have been very bad for Republicans and would have seriously jeopardized our ability to keep and grow our thin House majority. I mean, we absolutely have to win in November if we're going to save the country. So never once in history has a shutdown benefited the party that started it, the Republican Party. It's only backfired every time. The stakes are too high right now to have swing district voters turning against us. And everybody needs to understand this. The reality that we talked about a few moments ago, it would take a 2/3 vote to get out of a shutdown once it started. So when all that pain was turned up and everybody's blaming the Republicans and people are getting more and more angry, we would have needed Democrat votes to reopen the government. And the price for those votes would have forced us to accept a far worse policy outcome than the spending bills that we got now. That is the reality. It's inescapable. You'd have a big chunk of my dearest friends. I mean, I come from the conservative movement myself. I'm a hardliner myself. A bunch of my friends would never join in the vote to reopen the government. And so you could have had a prolonged, very difficult, very politically costly situation on our hands. And that was just simply not an option that we could do.
And I think, Mr. Speaker, you can sympathize with my view and the audience's view, which is we have been hearing that excuse for 11 years. And November is super important. And I want to see Republicans remain in the majority and, God forbid, Hakeem Jeffries ever become Speaker. But, if we rewind the clock a little bit back to October, and I know you just got thrown back into this thing, that would have been a time to shut it down and fight. We had more seats. It's further away from the election. And what I think we're flirting with, Mr. Speaker, is that our base is losing total faith in House Republicans, at least capacity to put up some form of a fight when it comes to spending, when it comes to the border. And I want your just thoughts in response to that, because our faithful, our audience, our base, they feel as if that Republicans go to D.C. just to kind of give the Democrats whatever they want. I asked our audience ahead of this conversation, Mr. Speaker, what we want to ask, and they're fired up because they love the country. And I believe you want what we want. Yeah. You were one of the more conservative members of Congress before you became Speaker. Can you respond to that sentiment, which I think is a well-founded one that I share with the audience?
Charlie, I share it too. You're right. As I mentioned, I come from the conservative movement. For 20 years before I was elected to Congress, I was a constitutional law liberty defense litigator on the front line. But we defended religious freedom and sanctity of life in the courts and our fundamental freedoms. I worked for most of the conservative groups in the movement at one point or another, filing briefs for them in the courts and arguing the cases and all that. So, look, I come from that corner of the party, and I'm with your audience. I agree. Now, here's the thing. With the smallest majority in U.S. history, I cannot throw Hail Mary passes on every play. I'd like to, but it's not a winning playbook. It's 3 yards in a cloud of dust right now. It's inch by inch up the field. Now, look, we have to reform the way Washington works, and we have plans to do it. In fact, we just got FY24 done. That's the spending bills we just passed. We're directing our attention to FY25 right now. We are going to force, with the tiny leverage we have, we're going to force more change. We broke the omnibus fever in funding. Now we're trying to break out into actually 12 separate appropriations bills. We have an aggressive calendar to get that done way in advance of the end of the fiscal year this time, so we can break some of this. But when we get a larger majority, I mean, for goodness sake, give me at least 2 votes, right? I think we can have a larger sizable majority, not 25 or 30 seats anymore because of gerrymandering and redistricting, but we can have a bigger majority. You get that, you get the Senate. We're going to make big radical changes. I've talked to President Trump and all my colleagues about what that first 100 days looks like, and you will see proof right out of the gates. I mean, aggressive changes to the regulatory state, the deep state, the bureaucracy that's turned on the people and weaponized against them, to the budgeting and spending process so we can get the debt under control, to all these things. I mean, the border, all these big priorities for the country, and we got to project strength on the world stage again. Our core principles are what we're defending. We're in a fight between 2 competing visions for the country, and ours is the same guiding principles that made us the greatest nation in the history of the world. We're going to fight for those, and we're fighting for them every day right now. You just don't see it highlighted because, again, the margins are so small. That's the challenge.